Be honest with yourself for a second. If they walked away from you, it was not because you were average, it was not because you were easy to forget, and it was not because you had nothing real to offer. People who keep emotional distance do not usually run from what is empty, they run from what is deep. They pull back. When something starts touching the parts of them they work hard to hide. So if you have been blaming yourself, stop right here and hear this clearly. Their distance was not proof that you lacked value. In many cases, it was proof that your presence carried weight. And not everyone knows what to do with something genuine when it finally enters their life. Stay with me, because this is where most people misunderstand the whole story. At first, the one who leaves looks free. They look calm, maybe even relieved, while you are left carrying the questions, replaying the silence, trying to understand how something that felt real could suddenly turn cold. They seem untouched. But that early calm is often not peace. It is escape. It is space mistaken for healing. It is emotional noise going quiet for a moment. Not because everything is resolved, but because they have stepped away from what challenged them to feel. And when life gets quiet enough, when distractions lose their power, when the nights get a little longer and the surface stops being enough, that is when the truth starts to rise. That is when the memory of you begins to return in a way they did not expect. In the beginning, it probably felt personal. That is what pain does. It makes everything feel like a verdict. You may have thought maybe you cared too much, maybe you asked for too much, maybe your love was too serious, too honest, too intense. But the deeper truth is often much simpler. Some people are comfortable with attention, attraction, chemistry, and fun, but they get uneasy when connection becomes real. They can enjoy closeness until that closeness starts asking them to be fully present. That is the point where fear wakes up. Not always obvious fear. Sometimes it looks like confusion, sometimes it looks like coldness, sometimes it looks like mixed signals, delayed replies, emotional distance, or a sudden need for space that appears out of nowhere. But underneath it, there is often the same pattern. Real closeness begins to feel unsafe. Emotional depth begins to feel heavy. Vulnerability begins to feel like pressure, and instead of naming that truth, they convince themselves the connection is the problem. They tell themselves it is too much, too deep, too serious, too complicated. But this next part matters, so do not miss it. What they call too much is often exactly what makes a bond unforgettable. Your honesty, your emotional awareness, your consistency, your ability to sense what was not being said, your willingness to stay present when things got uncomfortable. Those things do not feel casual, they feel real, and real love always reaches places that shallow connection never touches. After they leave, there is usually a strange split in timing. You feel the loss first, they feel the relief first. You sit with the ache while they sit with silence and call it freedom. You are grieving what was lost while they are enjoying the absence of emotional responsibility. That difference can feel unfair, and honestly, sometimes it is. But timing has a way of exposing what appearances hide. Because relief is not the same as happiness. Relief is only the removal of immediate pressure. Happiness needs something else. It needs meaning. It needs truth. It needs emotional safety. It needs a sense of being known. And over time, the person who walked away starts learning that space alone cannot give them those things. At first, the quiet feels clean. No deep talks, no emotional tension, no moments that force self-reflection. Just distance, just control, just room to breathe. But little by little, that quiet changes shape. What once felt calm starts feeling flat. What once felt easy starts feeling empty. They may not say it out loud, they may not even fully admit it to themselves, but the feeling begins. A conversation with someone new does not go as deep. A laugh lands, but it does not stay. A moment looks good on the surface, yet something is missing underneath, and that missing thing becomes harder to ignore. Keep listening, because this is where memory starts doing its work. Not in one dramatic wave, in fragments, in flashes, in small moments that suddenly bring you back. This is where the fantasy starts breaking apart. People who avoid emotional closeness often believe the answer is somewhere else. They tell themselves the next connection will be easier, lighter, less demanding. They imagine a bond with attraction but no emotional challenge, company without vulnerability, intimacy without exposure. And for a little while, that fantasy can seem believable. New attention feels fresh, surface conversations feel safer, Low-pressure connection feels manageable. No one is asking them to open old wounds. No one is close enough to see their fears. No one is staying long enough to touch the deeper layers. So yes, it can feel easier. But easier is not always better. Easier is not always real. And sooner or later, the difference begins to show. Because surface-level connection has limits. It can entertain, it can distract, it can even excite. But it cannot replace the feeling of being deeply understood. It cannot replace emotional rhythm. It cannot replace that rare kind of familiarity where someone can hear what you mean even when you cannot fully say it. That is why the comparison starts quietly. Maybe they do not notice it at first. Maybe they only feel that something is off. But then it grows. They begin comparing the way you listened, the way you noticed, the way you stayed, the way your care felt solid instead of performative. The things that once overwhelmed them become the very things they cannot easily find again. That is the irony. What they called pressure begins to look like love once it is no longer there. And then the deeper realization begins, not loudly, not with some dramatic confession in the middle of the night. It happens in silence. It happens when life becomes ordinary again. A hard day comes, and the person beside them does not understand the shift in their energy the way you once did. A conflict appears, and instead of clarity, there is distance, confusion, ego, or shallow reassurance. A quiet evening arrives, and they suddenly remember the way your presence used to soften tension without trying too hard. This is how contrast teaches people, not through speeches, through absence, through the simple fact that what they have now does not hold the same depth. And once that thought enters, it can be difficult to push away. Maybe I lost something real. Maybe I let go of someone rare. Maybe what I thought was burden was actually safety. That shift matters, because now it is no longer about missing attention or missing comfort. It becomes about recognizing value too late, and regret grows in strange ways. It does not usually explode, it builds quietly. It sits beneath routines. It follows them into late nights. It shows up while driving, scrolling, working, pretending to be focused. It appears when the world gets still enough to make room for what they have been avoiding. If you have ever wondered why some people seem fine at first and then circle back much later, this is often why. They do not always process the loss when it happens. They process it when their distractions stop winning. And by then, your life may already be moving in a different direction. While they are arriving late to their own emotions, something else is happening on your side. You are changing. You are not staying frozen in the place where they left you. At first, yes, there is confusion, there is sadness, there is the painful habit of replaying moments and trying to make them mean something different. But if you keep healing, if you stop chasing answers that only reopen wounds, if you sit with the truth long enough, something starts to shift inside you. You begin to see patterns more clearly. You begin to notice what you once excused. You begin to understand that love should not leave you constantly decoding silence. It should not keep you begging for consistency. It should not require you to shrink your needs so another person can remain comfortable in their avoidance. That understanding builds strength, quiet strength, the kind that does not need to announce itself, the kind that changes the way you respond. So when they begin reflecting on your value, you are no longer the same person they walked away from. That matters more than most people realize. Because return is one thing, access is another. Just because someone starts to miss you does not mean they still have the same place in your life. Just because they finally understand your worth does not mean you are required to reopen the door. And this is important, so stay with me. Their delayed realization may explain their behavior, but it does not erase its impact. It does not undo the nights you had to pull yourself together. It does not cancel the emotional weight you carried while they chose distance over honesty. Still, many of them do circle back in some way, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, sometimes through a message that seems casual but carries something unspoken beneath it. Sometimes through social media, a reaction, a late check-in, a question that looks small but clearly means more. And what is happening in those moments is often deeper than it seems. They are not just reaching out, they are testing the emotional space, they are checking whether warmth still exists. They are trying to feel if access remains without fully risking their pride. Because reaching back out requires more than missing someone. It requires facing the truth that they may have misjudged what they had. It requires admitting that their version of freedom did not give them what they expected. It requires vulnerability. And for people who built themselves around avoidance, vulnerability can still feel dangerous even when the longing is real. So they hesitate, they come halfway, they send signals instead of clarity. They approach lightly because going deeper would mean exposing the very part of themselves they spent so much time protecting. And this is where many people get pulled back into old confusion. A small message can awaken a lot. Old feelings return, hope returns, questions return. Maybe they changed, maybe they see it now, maybe this time will be different. But slow down. Do not let contact be mistaken for growth. Do not let nostalgia dress itself up as transformation. A return means very little if the inner work never happened, and the truth will not be found in words alone. It will show in how they handle closeness now. Real change has a different energy. It is not dramatic. It is not rushed. It is not full of big emotional speeches followed by the same old disappearing act. Real change looks steady. It looks accountable. It looks like someone being able to name their patterns without hiding behind excuses. It looks like staying present during uncomfortable conversations instead of retreating the moment things feel too emotionally real. It looks like consistency that does not vanish as soon as fear gets triggered. It looks like patience. It looks like respect. It looks like someone choosing honesty over avoidance, clarity over silence, repair over escape. That is how you tell the difference. Not by how strongly they say they miss you, but by how differently they show up when closeness asks something of them. Because missing you and being ready for you are not the same thing. Feeling regret and having emotional maturity are not the same thing. Longing can be real and still not be enough. This is the part most people need to hear more than once. Someone can finally understand your value and still not be capable of protecting it. Someone can look back and realize they lost something rare and still remain too unhealed to hold it well if it comes back into their hands. Awareness is only the beginning. Transformation is the deeper test. And if that test has not been passed, then reconnection will only recreate the same wound in a different season. So if they come back, let time reveal truth. Let patterns speak. Let consistency do the talking. Do not rush to meet a version of them that still has not learned how to stay. There is also another side to this that people do not talk about enough. When they start seeing your value more clearly, they are not only thinking about you, they are being confronted by themselves. They are facing the version of themselves that withdrew when things got deep, the version that chose emotional distance over emotional courage, the version that protected comfort by sacrificing connection. And that is not an easy thing to face. It stirs shame, it stirs pride, it stirs resistance. Because to admit they lost something meaningful through their own limitations requires humility, and humility is hard for anyone whose defenses were built around staying in control. So sometimes they reach out, but not fully. Sometimes they miss you, but still avoid the deeper conversation. Sometimes they want closeness again, but still fear what closeness asks of them. This is why old patterns can repeat unless something within them has truly shifted. And this is also why your own clarity matters so much now. You are no longer just deciding whether love is still there. You are deciding whether safety is there, whether maturity is there, whether your peace will be protected or disturbed, whether the connection now has the structure to hold the depth you naturally bring, because your depth was never the problem, your loyalty was never the problem, your willingness to communicate, understand, repair, and stay emotionally present was never too much. It only felt like too much to someone who had not yet learned how to meet it. So do not rewrite your nature just because someone once failed to hold it. The right bond will not punish you for being sincere. It will meet you there. It will value what is rare without first having to lose it. By the time many of them fully understand what they had, your silence starts speaking louder than any argument ever did. When you stop reaching out, stop over-explaining, stop trying to convince them to see your value, something changes. The constant access they once took for granted is gone. The emotional safety they assumed would remain available is no longer within easy reach, and distance creates a kind of clarity that presence sometimes cannot. What was always there becomes visible once it is missing. That is when curiosity grows heavier. They wonder what you are doing. They wonder if you have moved on. They wonder if someone else is now receiving the care, patience, attention, and emotional depth they once had. They begin to feel the cost of losing certainty. But let this settle in your heart. Their curiosity is not your responsibility. Their delayed awareness is not your burden to carry. You do not owe instant access simply because someone finally sees what should have been obvious in the first place. You survived being misunderstood. You survived the silence. You survived the version of love that kept asking you to hold more than your share. And that survival changed you, it refined you, it gave you standards. It taught you that emotional connection should not feel like waiting in confusion for someone to decide whether your presence matters. So if you have grown, honor that growth. Let your peace have weight, let your standards stay intact. Let the new version of you be harder to reach if reaching you now requires truth, effort, and consistency. That is not bitterness, that is wisdom. That is what healing looks like when it stops begging and starts choosing. And yes, sometimes life really does teach people through contrast. They move through connection after connection and slowly discover that attraction is common, but emotional attunement is not. Fun is common, but real safety is not. Attention is common, but presence is not. Many people can create sparks. Very few can create steadiness. Many can offer chemistry. Very few can offer calm, honesty, depth, and emotional responsibility at the same time. So when they meet others who look good on the surface but cannot hold them in the deeper ways you once did, memory sharpens. Not fantasy, not illusion, recognition. The kind that arrives after enough comparison has stripped the story down to what is true. They begin remembering the way you cared with intention, the way you noticed small shifts, the way you did not run from difficult moments, the way your presence felt grounding, not just exciting, and suddenly what once looked ordinary becomes unforgettable. But there is something even more powerful than being remembered. It is becoming the kind of person who no longer depends on being remembered to feel whole. That is the real shift. That is the deeper victory. Not that they come back, not that they regret it, not that they finally understand, but that you no longer need their understanding to confirm what you already know. Your worth did not begin when they noticed it, and it does not grow just because they miss it now. It was always there. The loss simply forced everyone to see it from a different angle, them included, but most importantly, you included. And once you truly see your own value, you stop negotiating it for temporary closeness or partial love. So if someone from your past reappears, move slowly. Let their actions breathe long enough to show whether they carry substance or only emotion. Watch whether they can remain present when conversations turn uncomfortable. Watch whether they take responsibility without becoming defensive. Watch whether they bring peace or just awaken old anxiety with a softer tone. Watch whether they can hold closeness without treating it like danger the moment it becomes real again. Because this is no longer about old chemistry, it is about present character. It is about whether what broke before has actually been faced, understood, and changed. And if it has not, then no amount of memory can build something safe. Familiarity can feel powerful, history can feel magnetic, but history without growth is just repetition waiting for another chance. Do not forget that. A second beginning only matters if it is built by two more honest people than the first one was. And if that honesty is not there, if the same avoidance still lives under a different mood, then protecting your peace is not rejection. It is self-respect. It is choosing not to abandon yourself just because someone else finally learned what you meant to them. Sometimes the deepest lesson is not that they come back. Sometimes the deepest lesson is that when they do, you have the clarity to choose only what honors the person you became after the pain. That is power, quiet power, clean power, the kind that does not chase, does not prove, and does not collapse the moment an old door opens again. At the end of it all, this is what remains true. Some people leave because they mistake depth for danger. They step away from what is real because real connection asks them to be seen. Later, life shows them the difference between what is easy and what is meaningful. Later, they begin to understand that what felt intense was often just honest, that what felt heavy was often just emotionally real, that what they ran from was not pressure, but presence. And yes, many of them do feel that realization deeply when it finally arrives. But your life is not meant to pause for that timing. Your path is not built around their awakening. You were valuable before they understood you. You were rare before they lost you. You were enough in the moment they doubted you, and you remain enough now. So do not shrink yourself to make someone's fear feel more manageable. Do not lower your standards to make old inconsistency feel acceptable again. Do not confuse being missed with being matched. Let the truth be simple. If they return with humility, consistency, accountability, and emotional courage, time will reveal it. If they return with nostalgia, loneliness, and the same avoidance wearing a softer face, time will reveal that too. Either way, you do not lose, because the strongest place you can stand is not in waiting to be chosen again. It is in choosing what aligns with your growth, your peace, and your emotional depth. And if they finally see your rarity now, let them. But remember this: rare does not mean endlessly available. Rare means deeply valuable, and what is deeply valuable should never again be handled carelessly.